Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today I am joined with two of my favorite YouTubers. We have Hankerin Fernale from Runehammer, as well as Trent from Miscast. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
And we'll be here answering people's questions as submitted from our patrons and from our viewers. But first, a brief introduction. Hankerin, do you want to introduce yourself and what your channel is all about?
Yep, I'm Hankerin Fernale. I'm also known as Brandish Gilhelm. Ingrid Bernal is my painterly identity I've been doing more recently. I do Runehammer on YouTube and a bunch of other things. I'm actually going through a life transformation coming out of having COVID a few months ago. And when your brain returns, it's a different brain. So I'm like getting into some kind of weird heavy metal thing. So expect to see heavy metal things from me in the future. That's where I'm at.
Excellent.
Nice.
Trent, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Trent. I have a YouTube channel called Miscast where I make all sorts of stuff. It's mostly modeling, and then I also hack up Nave as well. And yeah, that's what I do.
Fantastic. Yeah, originally you were like Miscast Terrain. When I first started watching you, you were doing a lot of terrain stuff.
Yeah.
But now you're doing a lot of modeling and game design, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's just whatever takes my fancy, really, is what I'm doing.
All right. So we're going to get into viewer questions in just a second. But first, a quick break to thank our sponsor for this video. Today's video is sponsored by Diesel, an RPG of Firefly meets Mad Max. Diesel is built for cinematic action around an emotional core. Each player is a Diesel, a modified human that runs on biotechnology. The game is set in Edge, a region at the end of reality. The dimensional wall of this universe intersects Edge, so people can simply walk out of reality into a space they call the Frontier, where anything is possible. It uses a simplified D6 pool system designed for the rule of cool, with the ability to overclock beyond normal human limits. The game is on Kickstarter right now, so click the link in the description below to check it out for yourself. And we're back. So let's go into our very first question. Let me see, where is a good one? We got a whole bunch of them submitted. Let's just start with the very first one by Alex Dzuricky, I think is how you pronounce his name, who I believe is a patron. And he asks, how much do you actually try out playing different systems? Do you find yourself settling on one system you prefer, or at least trying to settle on one? Or do you make an effort to experiment frequently and taste a bit of everything? And assuming you at least occasionally hack your game, how vocal are your players in expressing preferences or inputs on the kinds of rules and systems that you want to play with? So kind of a long question. Hankerin, do you have any input on that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, all three of us are kind of like DM type brains. So as a DM brain, every single system, I mean, everything that comes out, love it or hate it, is worth reading as a sort of a hacker. But as a player, like actually testing, like actually playing enough of it to actually know, that would be like maybe a month of playing something at least. Oof, that's a short list. That's quite short. I mean, that would be under 10 for me, like lifetime, to actually know something about multiple systems. So I'd have to say my answer would be very few, even though I read a zillion of them. To truly grok something, I am very low on the totem pole. What about you guys?
Yeah, I'd probably be the same. Honestly, I'm mostly playing in a club environment, so it's whatever people are excited about and that they're happy to DM is what I play in. But I think for me, mostly, I really like playing board games, especially like RPG orientated board games. And I think that's where a lot of my hacking stuff comes from, like the mechanics that I really enjoy with that, or the things that are simple to explain. But yeah, but I mean, obviously read all the stuff that comes out but I'm very like goal driven. It's like, what do our players want to accomplish? And then how do we make that work rather than...
Well, good thing about a board game, you can definitely grok that in like one or two goes.
Yeah.
And if you can find one cool thing, you could stick it in your game. It wouldn't take you getting to level 5 or something to grasp it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, the idea of like play testing a role-playing game so that you understand it is kind of a weird concept, because unlike any other game which is like fairly confined, any role-playing game is basically infinite. So it's really hard to say that you completely understand it or you've play tested it thoroughly, because it has this kind of infinite potential in it.
Yeah,
Something that I've struggled with a lot.
yeah.
Especially when it comes to people like talking about playtesting adventures, like how much have you playtested your adventures? Like, well, I do play them to try and work out any problems with them, but you can't say that you have tried everything in an adventure, because there's
It's more like I play tested it by doing the opening, and then all this other crap happened, and then I woke up and didn't know why there was a horse in my bed the next day. So I guess that counts as a play test.
Yeah.
Well, things go off the rails so fast whenever you try and test a system.
Totally.
Like I've gotten like a few bits of feedback from people who have like tested the new adventure I put out, Willoughby Hall, and every input that I get is just wildly different, with people doing stuff that I would never have anticipated. So it's like, there's no way I can test all of that stuff. It's all about trying to assemble enough like chaotic pieces where people can do weird things with it. And then at a certain point, you just have to be like, you guys take it away.
I guess I'm always like catering for the people I'm playing with as well. So it's like every group, they have different expectations or like what they enjoy or different levels of complexity also. So I think what I really like about board games is they're so simple to understand. So if you can explain the mechanic to the dumbest of your group and they have a great time, then it's easy to develop that further.
That is a designation you need to make up front too. You're the dumbest person here. So the teaching tonight is going to be mainly focused on you. And if you get it, everyone else should get it.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, like most of the role-playing games I've designed for 10-year-olds. So a lot of it is that. It's just like taking some system and then just boiling it down so a 10-year-old can learn it within 10 minutes. Because if it doesn't fail that, it doesn't meet that criteria, then it doesn't work for me as a game. And then it turns out that that's really good for adults too.
There is a deep satisfaction though in taking a complex game. You can choose one, like, I don't know, something like Rifts, and then playing it as if a 10-year-old had just learned it. That's kind of where I live. That's my domain. Is I'll take the huge game, I'll read the first 7 pages and be like, I got this.
Yeah.
And we will begin.
Well, so much of like the hobby was born out of that, because like when OD&D comes out, people like get this pamphlet and like if you try and read it, it's completely inscrutable. It's just like, what is even happening in here? It doesn't explain what you're doing, and it's just like you're in a dungeon and things are happening. Like, how did I get there? And it just doesn't tell you and stuff like that. So like people would get this pamphlet and be totally baffled because there'd be no one to teach them, and they would just make things up as they went, and like the whole hobby just sort of evolved out of that. That's what's so great about it.
Sounds like a perfect night.
Let's go to a different question. Hangren, do you want to pick one? Did anything jump out to you?
I do. I got to go down to old Humphrey Gobo down here. Which is better for a one-shot, a 1-page or like a module? So like a lasers and feelings kind of jam going on, or take like the Song of the Fen from Dungeon Magazine and squish it down into a night of poetry and eloquence. Like which one is cooler, do you guys think? It's kind of a fun one because one-shots happen so much nowadays.
Yeah. I really like 1-page dungeons. I've run a couple of those. Some of those work really well. If you not in terms of rules, but in terms of adventure. Like if you can get a good dungeon and you kind of cram it onto one page with like lots of notes around it, they're giving you a lot of interesting, material for what's in there. I can run that pretty well for one night.
That's like a skull fungus type style.
Yeah.
You
can get a lot of stuff packed in there. There's a really great one called like the Temple of the Moon Priests that you can find online. It's totally free, and it's really dense with information, and there's like a lot of great detail and color in it, and you can just run it for like easily a one session. But usually my best sessions that are one shots that I've run are longer modules, just because there's more texture there and there's just more stuff that you can build off of.
Yeah, I think for me, whenever I'm running things that like are meant to be a one shot or something for one night, I always just do previous adventures that I've already ran that were part of a campaign or something, and trying to condense and abridge those things. Because I think the worst feeling ever is being a part of a one shot and then not having a satisfying ending. So it's like, if it's something I know that I can pull off, that's what I do.
Right. Because it's going to end that night.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of agree with you, Ben. Like I'd rather read some big thing and then just like dehydrate it down into like 3 scenes or 4 scenes.
Yeah.
But ever since that first AtCon, the Absolute Tabletop Con, ever since running that one shot like at a con, it's kind of changed my concept of one shots to be cataclysmic.
What one shot is this?
That's what's like the origin of Viking Death Squad. So it's basically they get down and they're like clashing with Lucifer. And in so doing, he like tricks them. And I had a little pair of like rubber devil horns, and someone in the group has to become Lucifer. And then like he sort of calls down this end of the world, and you basically have like 4 more turns because you're running out of time. You're at a freaking con.
Yeah.
And so he calls down the end of the world. So the world's going to end no matter what happens. And at first I just thought this is just like a guitar solo at the end of an album. It's going to be great. But it actually became very eloquent because I think people knowing the ending was coming for their characters, they kind of pulled out their epiphanic gestures. They felt a little more free to like flourish because nothing had to be believable or something. So I don't know. That was a very potent experience. I've been fueling off that for a while. So that would be my answer. Is I like to cook down a big thing to make 3 hours of play, and everybody dies at the end, no matter what the story is. That way you're just free. You're just
true.
You never have to worry about that character again.
Yeah.
It does like totally change the way that people act though, right? Because if it's even if if it's not an apocalypse, it's still a one shot. So usually you're not going to see that character again, no matter what. So I feel like people just act totally differently in one shots. They drive their characters, with more reckless abandon than they would in a normal game.
If you're lucky, if it's a good session, you want that to happen. If they fall into their old 10-foot pole patterns, like you've got a emergency blinking red light one shot on your hands. Like that's not gonna go well, like, ooh, I wonder if I can get some more experience. And like, no.
Yeah.
You are a mouse.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Trent, do you have any good questions that you saw?
I like this one from Cage. What do you think of players making their own spells? I found it to be a very interesting practice that not a lot of people do. And I really love magic in my games, but I like magic that feels like magic, that doesn't have like a science or a reason to it, that feels like chaotic and not very well understood. So the idea of putting that in the player's hands is pretty scary to me. So that's why I would love to hear answers.
Yeah, I was just reading a little bit about this, and like I'm trying to read the whole AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide out loud. It's just like a stupid ongoing project, and so you get to read all.
That's like a Nick Offerman project.
But the fun part is you run into these bizarre little systems and things that like Gary cooked up, where he'll have like your players want to develop a spell. Okay, here's like 9 pages of 8-point font on how you would do that. But just in general, I like the idea of players developing spells as long as it takes a while. And so they can say, I want to create this kind of spell, and then you can create a mission or a quest around that. Where you can be like, in order to accomplish that, here's the stuff that you're going to need to pull off. You're going to need to consult certain sages. You'll need to visit this library. You're going to need to collect these types of things. And now you have like a whole mission built into it. So they get a great spell at the end as a good reward. That always seemed like fun.
That's a tough one. It's just like a thing to value. I can't say that I just walk into the D&D grocery store looking for players creating spells. It's not something that I just like want. But with the right player, which is a rare player too, it would be someone who, I don't know, wants to sort of monkey wrench things, but in a fair way, or wants to sort of gadget their way to some unseen solution, which is perfect for like a really into it wizard character. But as far as like wanting it in a game or like thinking it's cool or something, I'm not sure I have a stance on that. A lot of the groups I'm in would not want to go that far afield. And also I've never really had a group that really does side quests with any verve. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced that, but I've never gotten that to really work. They're so fixated on something, either like something silly, which is quite common, or like the sort of the big Death Star thing, that they don't, I don't know, just from experience. In theory, it sounds really cool. Like, let's go get the egg, and then we're going to grow the egg, and then we're going to make this plant thing, and we're going to boil it, and like, we're going to do this. That sounds like super dope, like 3 weeks of play to get this spell so they can break the soul stone or whatever the fuck. But I don't know if I've ever really seen that happen. I feel a little green at this moment. It sounds neat.
I think it's rarer than people expect. Like that's definitely a kind of end goal that people talk about in the OSR a lot, where it's like you want, the ideal is to have like this kind of open world with highly motivated players that are like looking around for missions that they think are cool and then like self-directedly pointing themselves at it and figuring it out a way to do it. But I feel like those sorts of groups are just rare because it's hard to find players that are that self-motivated and are willing to do like these kind of long-term projects.
Especially if you've resolved some really cool things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, if you've like, you know, supplanted the vampire dynasty that used to rule the land and now like it's an age of good. It's hard to like not sleep in for a week. You know what I mean? Like, that's not when I want to go invent a spell. That's when I want to like lay on the beach.
Retire and make spells in my basement.
Yeah. I need to figure out this retirement spell, you guys. This shit's gonna be hot. It's gonna make Wish look like nothing.
Yeah, sure.
I know you're designing a lot of spells yourself, Trent. Are any of your players interested in that?
I think so. I think it depends on like the scarcity of magic too, or kinds of magic that you're using. Like if you look at 5e magic, there's like an answer to everything magic, or it's all very, or it's things that, you know, could easily just be a magic item or something like that. But something like that's all powerful that you're just trying to harness with your puny brain, I think that could be really interesting to sort of tap into and experiment with. But yeah, I mean, we've definitely talked about it, but it's like, again, it's like one of those sort of long-term rewards. But are you ever going to get to that point anyway? Probably not.
Yeah. The main times that I've had players design spells is in the really short term. Like, in like my Maze Rats rules, if you're a wizard, you randomly generate spells every day. You roll up a couple keywords and that creates a spell, and then you have to improvise on the fly what it does, and you have to negotiate a little bit with the GM so that it's not stupid. But that involves a lot of like the wizards thinking about their keywords and making a spell out of it. So that works, but you know, it's very short term and it only works once. Like you don't get that spell forever. You just cast it and it's gone.
I mean, I guess
I love that little tidbit, by the way. That's a really good version of it because it's just like, what the hell is this?
Yeah. I think, you know, we can sort of experiment with the timeline though. So it's like, rather than making your own spells being like the long-term goal, I think it's like, why is it at the end? Why is it something to retire for? It's like, no, how do I bring this at the start of the adventure? Can I give them tools or something? Can I give them ways of combining spells that already exist? Can I have them edit their spell text, all that sort of stuff? I think it really depends on that, because if you bring the long-term goals at the start, which I think it should be the goal most of the times, you know, like why is retirement, you know, getting a castle at the end when you could, you know, have all the fun then in the moment. Where
it might be cool to throw a glove on this one. So it'd be like I love the idea of editing spell text that you said. That's a cool phrase. That's like, you know, tinkering with the gears, so to speak. It'd be cool as a part of a campaign to throw a glove at a wizard. So it's like, no one around right now can crack the nut on this spell. So, but you know, you meet this old dude and he kind of sees a twinkle in your eye and he's like, we've been waiting for somebody like you. I bet you could crack this nut, you know, and he gives you this like Rubik's Cube, basically. You know, and you slam dunk the Rubik's Cube. And I love the idea of putting it right in the beginning.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And it's almost like you're mad-libbing a spell description.
Sure, yeah.
You know, and it's to do whatever, you know, to, I don't know, destroy the evil squirrel army.
Yeah.
Thinking about like long-term spells was getting me thinking about like long-term projects, which again in AD&D was a big thing. Like there was tons of rules for long-term projects, and there's just they were very specifically spelled out. And I think that was because there was a much more like zoomed out perspective on like what the game was. So it was totally normal to just like have a character and say, I'm going to have him do spell research for 4 weeks. And you sort of like, and you set him off to the side and you make another character that you're playing as right now. Well, that guy's just like doing it in the background and then he comes back and it's like not a big deal. But people are like very focused on being one character now. I mean, for good reason. I understand why they would want to, but you kind of lose this. One of the nice things about having this long-term perspective is you get a more sense of the world of like multiple things going on in the background, and you're controlling multiple characters. So you're getting more than one viewpoint on the world. So there's a sense in which you're playing like aspects of the world rather than just playing one character. Yeah. And that is like a style that's kind of lost now, I feel like.
Yeah. I just feel like, I don't know how many, maybe your story is different, but like how many groups have you been a part of that everyone has long-term plans and then, you know, that those groups fall apart after, you know, 10 sessions or something, and you have a great time, but for other reasons, everyone splits. But it'd be great if people could realize those longer term goals, maybe in smaller ways, or you can actually see progress in those areas earlier on. Because I think there's so much narrative there too.
On the parts of the hobby that are like visible right now, like publicly visible, I do agree that like the cleric fortress is a little bit gone.
Yeah.
I would have to agree with you there, but like just in my, again, I always try to think of just like what has actually happened, even though it's just my little porthole into things. But we've almost always had at least one tower that gets built like by some sidebar rule and that has like taxation and a fucking salt mine or some shit. It's always a damn salt mine. And the salt is used like for the tavern somehow. It makes salt beer or something every damn time. So I do think I really I like what you're saying, Ben, about that. You know, maybe it is a zoomed out sensation, or maybe it's sort of a lack of like having sort of like Warcraft in your mind, like telling you that's D&D. Mm-hmm. Because we also didn't have that for a while. We just thought of it as like this sort of Silmarillion kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, well, I have this like 23rd level ranger, but I wouldn't play him. That would be such an asshole move. He's over there.
Yeah.
He's like ruling the Numenor. Like we don't want to interact with him. He's kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
And that is a little bit gone now that you say it, at least in like how we see the game, like on YouTube and in the stuff we're buying.
Because it's so rare to have these campaigns that go on for 20 years, right? Which some people have. I assume that it was rare back then, but there are some of those campaigns that are still going now that have like these crazy stories of these super long-term projects. But that's just an ideal that most people are finding hard to realize, I think.
Yeah, I mean, what do you guys is like longest game?
I think I was in a campaign that went on for like 3 years, but like the main problem was that I was mostly playing with other teachers. At the school I was working at, the teachers would just come and go. They would move out of state. They would go on to different things. And it's just really hard to keep a large friend group all living in the same place with the same schedule together.
Yeah. I think about 5 years. How about you, Trent?
Yeah, not very long at all. I mean, I haven't been in the hobby for very long, but I mean, it's like trying to keep everyone down. It's been hard. But like when... Like I said, all the board game stuff, it's like we've been playing the same board game for 4 years. So we play Eldritch Horror and we role play and all that sort of stuff. But we've been doing that. And, you know, they're like 8-hour sessions. But we've been doing that for so long. And I mean, we know the game inside out. But And I mean, that was a big motivation to actually start doing the RPG stuff because I wanted to show my other friends how much I was enjoying this, but it's very hard to bring people in like that. Like, okay, everyone start role playing this board game. You know?
Go.
How do you feel about this Eldritch Horror?
Well, I love the idea though of not waiting around. I mean, especially just because of my general like life attitude.
Yeah.
I'm a very life is short type person. So Trent, I love your idea of like, why are these things off in the distance?
Yeah.
Screw that.
Or why don't we play
maybe
like
the opening challenge is to work on the castle. Like let's just attack this stuff right away. Bait them with the tinkering of the spell wording for like a 7th level spell when you're first level.
Yeah.
And just bait them with the big stuff that's supposed to wait for the 7th year. Right?
Sure.
Why the hell not? I think the only thing that might stop you from doing that would be the sort of infrastructure of your game, which I've been obsessed with lately. Is that removing infrastructure from my game has completely changed and freed it in a really positive way.
What do you mean, removing the infrastructure?
Without having to show everything.
Sure.
Yeah, so I don't have to show much of anything, really.
Yeah.
And so you can jump around in locations. You can leap between characters. You can leap over timescales, as you mentioned, Ben. Like 4 weeks just passed.
Yeah.
And I don't need to show the 4 weeks either through terrain or like cool looking maps or whatever. It's all just kind of gears turning in players' heads. But I'm just getting excited now. I don't think this
So recently,
what are we talking about?
Recently I've started playing RuneQuest with one of the guys at our club, and like that blew my mind when he's like, we're going to do all your ancestry and all that sort of stuff, and we can play out those at later times, and also while you've got a character here, let's set up characters over at this, and it's all a fixed point, and these events are going to happen. I think that's really exciting. So they're things that I want to bring into my game too. And like that long passage of time, like 2 weeks have passed, well, yeah, okay, but then it's like 2 years have passed and you're bigger and stronger now and you've been on these adventures. Now let's do that next adventure,
Things get weird when you start scaling out. Like, what is that game? Pendragon, where like every game session is a year, where it's like you're Arthurian knight, you go on an adventure, you do your quests, but then it's the end of your adventure and then it's winter where you're just holed up in your castle and the next session is the next year. So if you go through 20
so your turn's like a month?
Something like that, or it's just the adventure is just knights go on one adventure a year. It's just like the trope. So basically, if you manage to have a campaign where you go through 20 adventures, your character is now 20 years older.
That's super cool.
Yeah. So you'll have life events where you have to get married and now you have kids and now you're training your kid and now you're too old, but now your kid is the knight. And it's just like, whoa, we never see these kinds of, it kills you, it takes your place.
It takes all your stuff.
But we just never see time scales like that in role-playing games. Because the way that like, I don't know, a lot of people play 5th edition with XP for sessions completed. What is it? Milestone, which is pretty common. And just because it's really easy to do. But what ends up happening, I've seen this when I played a bunch of 5th edition, is that you start leveling up, every 1 or 2 sessions because that keeps things interesting. But each session is usually less than 24 hours. It's like a mission.
Absolutely.
Right. So by the time that like less than a month of game time has gone by, you've gone from like a peasant to a demigod in like 1 month.
So true. So true. That is what unraveled just about our Eberron game. Is that strange feeling of looking back at the calendar and being like, I think 10 days have passed.
Yeah.
And now I can see into like alternate dimensions and stuff. It's just like, man, all these other students must be really bad or I'm a genius.
Yeah. Well, that's what I really like about like Knave and its hacks with the object-based progression. Like magic items and stuff are a great way of showing that progression that could happen in short scales of time, and can completely transform you into a different person too. So that's why I've been focusing on that a lot with what I've been doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of good ways to make your characters have more options without them just like physically becoming more powerful, because that just becomes weird unless you're doing it over long time scales.
Yeah. Oh, well, like I've had experiences where it's like we've been explore like in 5e exploring a dungeon for 5 sessions, and it's like, how did you suddenly learn to be a warlock in that time? Why between room 1 and 2? It doesn't
inevitable.
what happened? So yeah.
I'm just gonna go on to our next question. I thought this one was
that
interesting.
was a very clear, concise answer. Creating spells is awesome.
Yeah.
Do it.
Let's see. Daiku Games wants to know, where do you see the trends for game design evolving? Particularly
Sure.
OSR, but really any
Ooh, that's a
RPG.
little bit where we were headed.
Yeah, and where do you see things going coming up in the future with new game stuff?
Well, that's a doozy. There's also some emotional baggage there, like kind of where do you want it to go?
Yeah,
Let's get into that.
Let's go with where we want it to
unpack
go.
that,
Yeah.
Well, Trent, what do you think? Where's it going and where do you want it to go?
Yeah, well, for me, I think accessibility is a big thing playing online, especially with like in COVID times too, where we've been split up from our groups and all that sort of stuff. Making games easier to play or having alternate rules for better tabletop experience while you're trying to share screen time with 6 other people. And I think we'll start seeing a trend there, or I would like to see that. Like rules being more accommodating, or even just having like alternate rules, like, you know, advanced rules in the back or something like that, or ignore this if you're playing online, that sort of thing. Like, I love playing in person, don't get me wrong, but I would also, while we're all separated, or, you know, especially in a digital age where I'm connecting with people all over the world, I'd love to play with them and not be twiddling my thumbs or waiting for my turn or trying to keep engaged when there's distractions literally everywhere. Yeah. And I mean, like, even talking to really like experienced DMs and stuff, they talk about their struggles with, you know, DMing in front of a screen, let alone a novice like me who's trying to command attention or learning as I go. Makes it difficult online, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. Like, in terms of like mechanics, things that I've noticed, I've seen a lot of stuff revolving tracking inventory, weirdly enough, showing up in more and more games where it's more stuff that's like slot based. So people are actually putting more rules around that. Where like even in, was it Pathfinder 2 of all places, like it had rules for tracking encumbrance that was slot based, or I think they called it bulk, which is crazy because like there was only a couple games before that were doing that. And then to see like this big game adopt that was really neat, because no one tracks encumbrance. So making that important was interesting. The other stuff I'm like noticing, layout is getting better generally, which I'm really happy about. Just because so many games have like really sloppy design, or where it looks really pretty, but it's not designed for use at the table. And I'm noticing more people paying attention to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, OSE is the master class in how to write and lay out in a way that's usable on the spot.
Yeah.
Man, where is it going? I don't know. I'm going to go ahead and let my limbic system pretend that it's also my forecasting system. So what I want is what's going to happen. So I think what that is we're going to see the same backlash that occurred. Well, that's kind of a mean word, but a backlash that occurred right after skateboarding got like mega popular in the like Pal Peralta, Lance Mountain era. So in the late 80s. And then in the early 90s, there was a beautiful response to that, which is that it contracted in a way that it like sort of eschewed all the shiny stuff. Like skateboarding went from neon colors and crazy designs and like hand cut grip tape and like crazy like Japanese sun half shirts and stuff to like all skateboards looked exactly the same. And it was kind of like unsightly to have like neon colored wheels. It went back down to a lo-fi state. And in so doing, like it detrendified itself. And it still was growing and it still was big. So it wasn't like we don't like new people. That's not what it was saying. It was more just saying, wow, that got crazy for a second.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's actually about putting one foot on a piece of wood and pushing with the other foot. That's what we liked doing. We didn't mean to get into this kind of like neon world. And I'm hoping and predicting that that's what we're going to see is like this return. And this is why I'm a bit of like my own pariah in my own little world, is that I really dislike the term old school. I think it's a generalization that is just not accurate enough to be useful. But here I am. I'm like, I've seriously took all the books off my shelf, except like 3 or 4 of them, and it's just that OSE book, because it just solved the problems. It saw me.
Yeah.
It saw me as someone who didn't need a bunch of pictures of aboleths. Like, I know my shit. I know what I'm doing. I can do this. I can use my imagination. And it saw that. And I think that's that plain looking skateboard.
Yeah, I think there's like a couple.
So I would like to see that happen, is like this amazing, like golden age almost that we've seen is starting to now reach a little bit of a, you know, it's got almost a bubble feel to it. Like the amount of color and the amount of like vividness to it is just kind of exploding to the point where I'm like, I don't think I've ever not bought the latest thing from D&D until recently. Just because I'm just overloaded. I'm just like, I don't know. It's just like, it's like the reverse beep is in the street outside my apartment every day. That reverse beep, I swear. Anyway, so that's my thing, is I would like to see it get back to even some of the things that you're very good at verbalizing, Ben, is like not necessarily what's old, because I don't want to go back. That's not my mindset in life. But what's sort of, I don't know, essentialist or clean or elegant, you know, better words that we can use to continue to iterate on the hobby without thinking that something was done long ago that we should be revering. You know,
I
cool
completely
things
agree
have
with
happened
you
in the past, but we can do it now too.
Like, because when people say old school or OSR, I think like there's a whole bunch of different types of factions that use that name. And like one of them is like very much devoted to almost like preserving old rules, preserving a particular structure and the way things were done in the past. But then there's like a whole separate group, which was the group that more attracted me, which was, if you look at a lot of these old school rules, what's more important there is the attitude that it had, which was one in which you were supposed to tear these things apart and rebuild them in your own image, whenever you wanted to. This was your game. It was not Gary's game. It wasn't Arneson's game. It was your game. The really early books even say that very explicitly.
Yeah.
And that was always what really appealed to me. Like I have no nostalgia for the really old versions of the game. I wasn't playing then. So like, you know, having these specific, you know, the rules for thieves where you roll percentile dice versus rolling a d6 for something else. These like weird finicky rules that people have like tons of nostalgia for. I can understand why, but I don't have that. What I love about the old school stuff is how light and clean and fast it is, and how quickly it got to the part of the game that I liked, which was, you know, interesting, dangerous decisions where like my thinking as a player was what mattered. And I wasn't seeing that as much in a lot of the new school games. So that's what I liked.
I feel that would make Trent's prediction work as well. Like if you're playing online a lot, I mean, actually, Knave is a great example. Like, or even, I don't know, Dungeon World is a great example, or some of the sort of Redux sort of mindset games that keep you from looking down, which I think is maybe what you were hinting at, Trent, is like, when you're online, like looking down at something is completely different than at the table.
Yeah.
As far as like a book or a thing, you know, whatever, you kind of want to really keep the sort of simulated eye contact going.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's wishful thinking, but I would like to think that's where we're headed. I don't know. It's maybe crazy.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, well, like obviously I have no experience in the previous worlds of D&D. And I guess for me, it's like I love looking through all those books and seeing the pictures and all that sort of stuff. To me, that's inspiring when I look at art that looks accessible to me. I like going through those old books and seeing different art styles as well, because it's like, well, my game doesn't have to fit in this polished setting. And like I see that with like I primarily do tabletop wargaming. So I play like old school fantasy and all that sort of stuff, and Mordheim and all those old games where those models, they were sculpted on deadlines and they were sculpted by interns and all that sort of stuff. And I love those models because they have so much crust and grit, and they feel human to hold. They don't look over sculpted and like they're being made perfect. And I think that's sort of the direction that D&D has. I feel uninspired when I go through those books and I look at the incredibly beautiful art, but because it's so uniform, it sort of blends together. For me.
Yeah, you get spoiled a little bit, and then you kind of get. Yeah, I love what you're saying about like interns sculpted the minis. That is such a beautiful point about. I would like to think where we're headed. I think we're headed more toward a nano business world. You know, we're headed toward a world where there are 1 to 5 people in the average company. I would like to at least dream about that. And they have to sculpt their own little, like Sean Sutter is a brilliant example of this. He's a one-man mini factory. And he's got this odd kind of style that's a result of being a one-man thing. And it's got that, like you mentioned, I mean, not quite to the level of like somebody with wax and a little doodad, but I think the world wants that. I think, especially because of this past year, like that giant sort of shiny car world lost a little bit of its shine in this past year. Like, I don't know about you guys. It's more like I kind of just want like my ratty hoodie and like my homies with like a Miller High Life. But before COVID, the ambition and the attraction towards shiny was actually quite intense. Like it was kind of at a bit of a crescendo almost.
Yeah, but like I think if you hand someone a 5e Dungeon Master's Guide and you say, hack this and turn it into the game that you want to play, that's intimidating because you're looking through this polished, overanalyzed book that is far beyond anything that you could ever make. And I think that's what we're losing, is that accessibility. And by doing these hacks and stuff, like the Knave example is really, it feels encouraging to hack. There's no art in it. It's just black and white on an A4 page. And you're like, okay, this I can do. I can see it all on my desk and I can go and circle things and cross things out.
Yeah, you don't feel so weird about it.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right.
I've heard people say that like about like Age of Sigmar stuff. Like I was really bummed when the old world went away. I wasn't even really into Warhammer, but I loved the world of the old world.
And yeah, man, they squished that in one fell swoop.
Yeah.
And
then people were like, there's benefits to it because the new models for Age of Sigmar are unbelievably intricate and detailed. They're just like leagues above anything that was possible before, which is true because like I've seen those things and they're nuts. But there's a real sense in which they don't have like the kind of heart where these old ones did, where you could tell that there was a guy with a little tool like scraping the lines into this guy's cape, and you could see where his brush had been. And I feel like that got a bit lost. But
I still feel like those Ral Partha minis and like the early era Reaper minis, the pewter ones and stuff, that are just, they're so timeless. They've almost become characters in themselves that I see players adapt to. Like the little pewter mini will, I've seen a player say that they have a bent Warhammer because the fucking pewter mini had a bent Warhammer. because there's something to that, Trent, you make a great point. And I would like to hope at least that is where we're headed, is toward that human place. Because I think the digital like sort of wave of excitement leads us a little bit to like a Logan's Run kind of a world. It leads us to this sort of sci-fi super dystopia. I don't think anyone ever really agreed that that's where we wanted to go. Like we're going to this great world where none of us have to talk to each other anymore. It's going to be amazing. And it's kind of like if somebody's raising their hand, like I kind of like my friends.
Yeah.
I like my bicycle. You know what I mean? So I would like to think that low tech is due. It's and in way more ways than just our hobby. that
I think
it wants to come back.
I think like the heavy democratizing of the hobby is happening really fast.
Oh yeah, amen.
Because like with the internet and with the ability to self-publish and even do print runs without,
I mean, we're both
forward.
testaments to that.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
And people are just starting to realize, well, one of the things that I preach a lot is just how easy it is to make your own role-playing game, because it doesn't have to be great. It can be pretty basic, but if it serves your needs, then it's fine. Because there's this attitude where people treat a polished, finished role-playing game like it's a AAA video game, where like you needed a huge team of people to make it, and you needed like all this research put into it, and have you like play tested it for 300 hours and so on. And it's like, these things aren't hard to make. You can literally just write one at your word processor at home. There's no game out there. I think it is the easiest kind of game to make, even compared to board games or anything else. But people like, there's still like this weird wall where people are like, this is a really difficult hobby to break into. But I feel like that's starting to come down, as people are like, I can just write anything that I want. My game can be 2 pages long, and I can get 10 years of content out of that. If my table is really into it, you know? And I'm just really glad that that's starting to happen. It's a big thing in the OSR for sure, because everyone likes making their own sets of rules in the OSR. But even in other fields, like in story games and stuff, there's just like, a million of these like 2-page story game hacks that are being put on itch every day, which people make fun of sometimes, but I'm glad that people are doing it, because at least they're doing something. They're putting their work out there.
Yeah, I mean, we made it about 20 minutes into our first session of my new group before things had to be made up.
Yeah.
I mean, they just had to. And 3 of my 4 players have never played D&D and didn't know what it was. And even with that group, which, by the way, I thank my lucky stars for it, because it's DM Dreamland. But even with that, there's a question that comes up, and that question just needs its own little bespoke answer. It's just that simple, it's Calvin ball, and if a question comes up that needs a nice little answer, as long as you write it down.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, you got dice, you got a brain.
Yeah.
There it is. And I was going into this thinking like, this is the simplest, cleanest, this is going to be, like they're just going to like fall on this water slide and start slipping. No, like right away, it was like, well, I got this little thing though. See, I got this little rub I need to ask you about. And you just hack it right on the spot. And I would like to think that is the lo-fi return that we're talking about.
Yeah. What other game out there can you play for multiple hours without using any rules? Like you can do that in role-playing games. That's really strange.
Again, I keep coming back to it, but it is a lot like skateboarding.
Yeah.
Skateboarding, you want to do it with your friends. You want a couple of beers, and you want to kind of get away with it. I've also found that like something that's a little bit missing nowadays is that with D&D being sort of quote unquote cool, there's a little bit of a thing missing, like how you don't get kicked off the street anymore. Like skateboarding's kind of cool because it's kind of like, you got to wait till late. You know what I mean? Like you got to go out late and put on your hoodie and stuff and kind of like keep a low profile because you're skateboarding. Fuck yeah, man. And that D&D had that tone for many years. It was kind of like you did not tell people you didn't know that you were into D&D.
Yeah.
Because you would just be like, what the fuck? That's like, what, something wrong with you? Like, I'm going to call somebody. And so I don't want it to be like that, obviously, but I do think that there's something there, and I think this lo-fi thing calls to it. It calls to, maybe like, I don't know, like with this group that I'm doing, we're playing like in a top floor that's kind of like this kind of creepy abandoned floor of a bar, and it has this really weird feeling. Like we put like a ping pong table like on a cocktail table, and that's like our D&D table, and it's just like all the infrastructure has been stripped away, so everything is ghetto.
Yeah.
But at the same, something about that now, the lower light and I think that's been a little bit missing from the age of wonders that we've been in.
Something that you just said in one of your videos recently, which is that like the game is what is actually happening at the table, rather than is something that really resonated with me when I was watching that. Because like there is this sense that, especially when you're first getting into D&D, where it's like to be in the hobby, is to have ingested this particular set of rules and understand the in-jokes that go along with this particular set of rules, and like the visuals and the tropes that go along with, you know, 5th edition D&D, rather than just being the hobby is doing stuff at your table and the stuff around it is not really relevant. It can be, but it's not really what the game is at its heart.
Yeah. Okay, so what was the question? Oh yeah, where's game design going?
So I do think it's going in that direction. I think it'll take a while.
Yes,
we're having a huge influx of people getting into 5th edition, and they're understandably just like enthused about 5th edition because that's what they're seeing everywhere. But then probably 10 years down the line, they'll have ingested it enough that they'll just start doing their own things.
I think the thing is that I think everyone has like that game designer in them too. Like they all, and I think a lot of it is like a permission thing. It's like giving players the permission to change things and be comfortable with that. Like we, at my local club, is mainly wargaming, but we hack everything. So at the moment, we're playing an old school Mighty Empires campaign, which is fantasy, and you play over a map and you play over the course of a year, and it's all diplomatic and all that sort of stuff. But because we're using old rule systems, it means that we have to be constantly changing and negotiating and working out how to keep the game moving whenever we hit these problems. And all the people that signed up to play fantasy initially versus what the game's become, they've all become decision makers and game designers in their own way as well. And I think that's all that permission thing. It's like they didn't know they could do that until given the right tools or scenario. So,
testify. Well put. Well put.
Let's go on to another one. Hankrin, do you have any other ones that looked interesting?
Well, let's see. I usually choose based on the comedy of the name.
That's legit.
Okay, let's get out of the area of theory and into some nuts and bolts stuff. So from Chic and Mod, do you often borrow ideas wholesale? I think that's the operative word here. From other sources for D&D, be it story, tropes, characters, MacGuffins. And the main question is, do you feel guilty? Or do you feel like less because of, here it comes, in quotes, unoriginality? So do you use the Mandalorian as your adventure format, and do you feel like you're being unoriginal? What do you guys think?
No, never feel unoriginal, but yes, steal things all the time. As whatever I'm reading at the moment makes its way into something. Right? And I think that's perfectly okay, right? There should be no reason to feel bad about that. And you know, even if I like do something that's recognizable from like a popular fantasy series or something, or you know, I have an object that seems familiar, the people are excited because they recognize that thing anyway. So there's no shame in it, I don't think. And if there was, you'd be playing with the wrong group, I think.
Yeah. Everything's stolen. There's no such thing as an idea that you haven't stolen from somewhere at some point. No. So originality is mostly just taking stuff you already know and just rearranging it and putting it in a slightly different order. That's all it is. So I steal stuff constantly.
So do you think that that there's some kind of psychological subtext in this question that you know that this is a thing that people are tuned for having an egg-eating small green man in their game? Like, are they picked at, you know, for having a guy who, like, you know, inherits his armor and can never take his helmet off? Like, are people picking on somebody for that idea? Is that why this question exists?
I think it might be just like intimidation to a certain extent, because there are quite a few good examples of really brilliant versions of world building, where you see someone coming up with something that just like blows your mind. Like, who came up with this? This world feels fleshed out. It feels real. All the factions make sense. There's like intricate politics behind the scenes. And then when you see even a couple examples of this, you're like, that's what I should be doing. If I don't live up to that, there's something wrong with me. And I'm just here stealing stuff from behind the scenes and I'm just a hack. I think that impulse can be there.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think we like the things we like for a reason, right? We should be stealing things because we like those things. That's what we want to have. Like,
Yeah, I'll almost like tell my players what I'm aping.
Yeah,
I'll be like,
yeah,
you know,
sure.
when Grogu was like sitting on that rock, it's kind of like that.
Okay.
And everyone nods. Everyone
Yeah.
nods with a satisfactory sensation of like, oh yeah, that was fucking awesome.
Yeah.
So I don't think any of us feel this problem at all, but I find it to be an interesting question because there must be this happening in some way
Yeah.
for this to be worded in such a way that maybe it's another part of this kind of like very fleshed out version of the hobby we're looking at these days.
Yeah.
Which is
Like
somebody's
polish.
coming into it going like, man, I heard this rumor that like DMs make up all their shit. But I'm over here like playing like fantasy Mandalorian. Is that bad? Like my friends think I'm weird, or maybe they're going to think I'm weird. It's probably more accurate. So whoever asked that question, let me get the name. Sheik Imad, dude or lady or both or neither. Don't worry about it. You're
That's
fine.
right.
You steal that
Most
shit,
of the time,
somebody
no one
calls
will
you
even know.
original, you stuff them in the garbage bin right there. There you go.
I like what you said about it actually making things faster half the time when you tell them what you're doing. Because you can be like, oh, remember like this one thing from Lord of the Rings? Okay, imagine that, except that it has more spikes on it and it's kind of on fire.
It's like
And they're like,
Weathertop,
oh, okay.
with robots.
Right. Saves you so much time. You just
Saves you so much time. Yeah, because I want to get to these dice. Like, let's do this.
I don't have time to do 10 minutes of description before we fight something. Let's see. Trent.
You remember the end of The Notebook? It's like that moment, only it's your character. It's your
character. I think people also I think people also will always like recognize things that they like and things that you do, whether it's intentional or not as well, because you know I find that all the time when I like make miniatures or anything like that. I'm sculpting something, it's like, oh, that looks like this thing or this character, and it's like, yeah, I guess it does, but you know, you can get 10 different comments of that can be different things as well. So yeah sorry to distract from the question asking.
No, that makes sense. Trent, you're next.
Yes.
Got any questions?
I do. Okay, Hector asks, what computer game do you think accurately replicates the OSR experience?
Well, that's oof.
I don't know if you guys are computer game people, but I thought this was
I mean, I think the big one, this has come up before, I think, and I think the big one is old school roguelikes. Old school roguelikes are literal replications.
Yeah, like Eye of the Beholder.
D&D. I haven't heard of that one, but yeah, even stuff just like Rogue, like the original, like you're a guy, you're walking through a dungeon, there's a monster, you have the right things to fight it, and then it just, you know, continues from there.
Luckily, it has the same hit points as you.
Yeah.
What a coincidence.
But one thing that like I hadn't talked about before is that for me, at least, the OSR mindset is treating the world like it's real and heavily relying on your player ingenuity rather than on your character sheet. So just like examining what's around you and using that to your advantage. And like one of the best examples of this that I played was Sea of Thieves, which is like a, you're like a pirate on the ocean with a crew. What's really fascinating about that game is that there's no HUD basically at all. If you want to like make your ship go faster, you literally have to go to the sails and then adjust them into the wind.
Pull on a rope.
You have to pull on the rope and adjust it into the wind. If you want to like know where you're going, one guy's at the wheel, someone else has to be on the map, and they have to shout directions at you because there's no compass. And then like to fight someone's ship, you actually have to like turn your ship at the right angle. There's weird stuff like where you can like grab a barrel of gunpowder and then jump from your mast onto their ship and then run down below and explode it and try and hold them. So it's all this weird like emergent stuff where it's not about builds. It's not about like any stats at all, because everyone's stats are basically the same. It's about like how creative you can be with this crazy situation that you're in.
I think my answer would be the old dusty chestnut of Ultima Online, which was extremely low tech in its visual. So no one assumed that what they were seeing was Ultima, because it was so chunky and so lame. But at the same time, the systems that made it function were so open-ended. So like when I played Ultima, this is a story I always like to tell when we're drunk late at night, is like I never killed any monsters. I just baked bread. That's all I did in Ultima. And I baked so much bread at such a level, it's all I ever did. So I just opened a bakery. Like by one of the main roads, like toward one of the, like the sort of basilisk spawn areas. Like it was prime real estate to open a bakery. And you could do that. People would make clothes and stuff. And like some people were blacksmiths and other people were adventurers. Some people were assholes. And there were no rules that had anything to do with any of it. It was all just so loosey-goosey because of its low techness.
Yeah.
You know, but it,
Do you
but
think
it gave that feeling like I was a dwarf baker. Like that's me. I mean, talk about my character. And it could sustain that character because for one thing, it was just like a little blob of like 16 pixels. It's just like, is that a dwarf? I don't know. So it kept it up here in a way. But
you think
overall, kind of a terrible experience. But as far as really trying to do what we're talking about, I think that's my best example.
Do you think any of that has had like an influence on what you do now, like the games that you're running at the tabletop?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've lived a video game life. I came up with the advent of computers and video games. I mean, that I lived that whole experience. I got like a Commodore 64 like when I was in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Like I played Parsec in first grade. My mind was blown. So I've been a video game kid for many, many years. It took getting old to kind of walk away from it. So I think video games have vastly shaped how I think. And I think it's why I come off as a noob when I'm getting back to the table, especially after the COVID year. I feel like a total noob being at a table with friends, with our beers sitting there. There's more beer and food than there is terrain. You know what I mean? Like getting back to that, I felt just like a complete beginner again, which is exactly where you want to be. I mean, I'm very, very outspoken about that. Like being a beginner is the ultimate state to be in mentally in doing anything. So I don't know, capturing what we're dreaming of sort of in a video game. Woo, that's a spicy nugget.
I really liked what you said about how the characters are just like a tiny blob of pixels, but how that activates your imagination more because now you are like involved in picturing what's actually going on there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think about that a lot when like I've been moving towards character sheets and characters just being simpler and simpler since I started in Pathfinder, which is like, 4 pages of spreadsheets to like write your character down. Like the weird thing is that like, as my characters have gotten like tinier and tinier in terms of like their stats, where they're more like low resolution, the way that that's opened up the way that I think about them. And I feel like I have more freedom to think about how they act and talk and things like that. It's weird, but I get more involved when there's less literally given to me.
Yeah, like my new players all drew their characters in the first session, and no one drew the entire character. They all just drew the head. I never told them to do that. No one said anything about doing that. They just did that. It's just like, I don't need to see this motherfucker's boots. Like, as long as I see the look in his eyes.
You want to go through one more round?
All right, one more round. Whose turn is it?
All right, I think it's my turn.
All right.
Let's see. What is a good one right here? A lot of these are just methodology questions. So this one just talks about XP. What are your feelings on milestone advancement as opposed to standard monster slaying and gold gathering? This is one of those age-old questions. And it's really just going to affect, I think it's going to depend totally on the group that you have. Are you the sort of people that are because XP for gold is all about self-motivation. Are you willing to find the gold and do what it takes to get it? Whereas I think milestone is more just about, you're a bit more along for the ride.
Yeah, it's more like almost an announcement with a milestone. It isn't like, I'm almost there. I'm almost there. It's more like, congratulations, like WandaVision is concluded. I'm like, whew, that was crazy. Okay, give me the milestone. Yeah.
There's less of a sense of
So what's the
earning.
question? Like, is one better than the other?
Yeah, what are the pluses and minuses of it? I think the big thing with XP for gold is that you feel a bit more like you've earned it. Where it's just like every level that you've got is just like, the reason I have this level is because I did X, Y, and Z, and I risked my life at that point. That's how I got the gold, and that's why I'm level 2. But there's less of that with Milestone, I think.
The way I've been doing milestones, but we've sort of made it a bit of a joke where at the end of every session, I do like a highlights reel where I award a fixed amount of XP for all the best moments of our sessions.
Yes.
Always end up being the total, but it's like, the points don't matter type thing. It's like everyone gets excited about that at the end, like, oh, what's going to be mentioned, So, but yeah, that's just how I do it. Bit silly, but yeah, the group I do it with likes it.
I'm in the middle of both. So in my OSC game, 1 gold equals 1 XP. And in my ICRPG game that Kelsey's running, we do milestones. So they're both fun. I don't know. That is a very tough call.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on the group.
Cool. Yeah, just say, whenever you see the twinkle in the eye, do that.
All right, that was an easy one. Hankrin, you got one?
Yeah, I got one. There's a whole bunch of these things. We kind of talked about black and white versus color. I think we covered that one. Here's a good one. Okay, this is tasty. This is from Alex. What's your feeling on dungeon size? Ooh, this is a zesty nugget here. What's the sweet spot? Is 5 rooms too small? And do you often make your dungeons with more than 2 or 3 levels to them? So just the overall question of just being like, what is the coolest dungeon size? And then he specifically calls out the 5-room dungeon, which roleplayingtips.com, by the way, if y'all don't know who came up with that, it is a mind-changing philosophy of making dungeons. So is 5 rooms too small? And then are there like multiple levels and shit? So it's like fundamental question, like what's a cool size for a dungeon? Like to make it mo fun. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I scale everything depending on the group I'm playing with, because I find that everyone seems to want to go through things at their own pace or finds enjoyment of like exploring things or rushing through or getting to the end. So when I'm doing adventures, like the same adventure with multiple groups, I add in like in between rooms that like depending on the time in our session, like the next door will take them to the in-between room or it won't. Does that make sense? So
yeah, like you're laying an extra brick in the road.
Yeah, but like, equally fun. And if it doesn't get used, I'll put it into something else next time. But just so like playing in the club environment, we typically have like a start and end point. So we would go all night if we could, but it's like we have to make that deadline and everyone has to feel good at the end is the goal.
Yeah.
So your dungeon size is like fluctuating in front of you.
Yeah, it's procedural, we just
it could be one more room, it could be 101 more rooms.
Yeah, how much time do you have?
Interesting.
Yeah, like it's hard to say. I tend to run, I guess most of my dungeons are like 10 or 12 rooms. I think that's pretty good for a one shot. At least that seemed to work out pretty well for me, because that way there's enough rooms that you feel like you're exploring, because I really love that. I love players to feel like they're exploring, that they found something that they might not have found, and so they feel a bit more rewarded, like, oh, I found that one secret room that might not have been there or I might not have gotten that reward. But I've also played a couple sessions of Rapin Athuk, which is just a massive mega dungeon with like I don't know, 10 plus levels. Each level has like hundreds of rooms. It's a planet. And the feel of that was crazy. I didn't get anywhere near finishing the thing, obviously. But when you get into a mega dungeon, it doesn't feel like a dungeon anymore. It feels like you're in like the mythic underworld. It feels like there's an entire universe down there, and you're just sort of like crawling through this universe, and there could be anything down there. It's a totally different sensation than going through like a tomb where you know you're going to get to the end. So in terms of just like the feeling of being there and the feeling of terror and immersion, mega dungeons are, I think, unrivaled, but they're obviously a huge amount of work to make if you're going to make your own. So when I tend to run stuff for players, it's more around 10 or 12, I think.
That's actually pretty, that's in my world, that's a lot.
Like it sounds
10.
like a lot.
So you have sort of 10, almost like ideas or 10 moments.
Something like that. Yeah. So it could be more than that. Not everything necessarily has to have something really cool in it. But I like players to at least have several decision points in the dungeon where like you're in this room and there's a couple exits. But like through each exit, you can like get a different scent, or you can see something around the corner, or you can like hear something coming down there. So they're making real choices, and the decisions they make actually have an effect on like how things turn out. I really like that.
That's very interesting. I guess I have the third answer. So this person will get absolutely nowhere in their question, which is that one, I always just do what really is actually a straight line squiggled. So I very seldom do branches. And I really do live by the sort of the 5-room formula, and either one shot or not. Even if you're going to be down there for 3 sessions, I live in that 5 concept mind space when there's an underground delve that occurs. I found that article to be like seismic for my style. That really helped me greatly, like make tidy little, I like what you call it a tomb. Like a tomb is something that in my world I can process. And I do like getting players back out into the fresh air. When this video reaches the public, there's going to be about 7 people who are going to send me emails that is complete bullshit. Because at one point we spent like 6 months in a friggin' dungeon, but it just in my recent work, I suppose I would say, I live by the 5-room dungeon rule, and you fudge it a little bit here and there. I almost never do branching. I'm fascinated with this idea of like 2 doors. That's just like mind blowing to me.
Well, not necessarily branching. Like my ideal dungeon is not like a branching network, but a looped network. So imagine like several loops that are connected
Closed
together.
Circuit. Yeah.
So basically, so it's just kind of more like a hive, where if you go in one direction, you're not cut off from the rest of the dungeon. You're just gonna have to take a longer route to get there. So basically every room has multiple ways to attack it. So
because going back is always horrible for players.
Yeah.
They don't like going back. That's for sure. They want to open the door and see the next weird whatever.
Yeah.
Not like, okay, we're gonna trek backwards and go to that other door. I've noticed they definitely don't like doing that. But I guess for this question, I would say no way is 5 too small. Absolutely not. It's great. I mean, one of my favorite ones that I did is my straight line dungeon, the Tunnel of Hathor Dur, which is just like a 1 mile straight line tunnel. That's it. That's all it is.
That's
and
interesting.
As you go down it, it is one continuous space. So there's no way to stop a thing that starts happening. There's no door. Really, a lot of my play hasn't had doors in the past. And ever since I read OSE, it's like the word door just kept popping out at me. And I was like, oh my God, doors. Yes, more doors, please.
Rules for doors. Rules if
that
they're
way,
stuck.
If I piss a thing off, we just got to go a little ways and then we can just glue this door. Fuck that Minotaur.
In the sessions that I'm doing at the moment with the Knave hack, we're playing it so the goal is to always go deeper and deeper, but each session is its own like little episodic thing. So the further you go down, the weirder and wilder everything gets. But when you start and where you end should always be in a completely different spot. So that's the goal, how I like to run it. And I think that works really well on the online thing as well. So you feel satisfied and then you're excited for the next
like
thing.
You come out into a bigger chamber where you can kind of breathe for a second. Before you kind of go back into the tunnels.
Yeah. And I think just like ending a session and like, you end the session into the entry of your next place to explore, and you can describe it. It's like, oh, I want to run in there, but we'll have to wait till next session. I think that's really helped with the consistency and just going down and down and down. So yeah,
I love the idea of levels too, just being gradations of weirdness or danger, because that way players can always kind of like tailor their experience. Like, are you ready for something really weird? There's a staircase there, it's gonna get weirder, and then they can make that decision.
I'm so bad at that. Like when I tried to run Sunless, like my version of Sunless Citadel back in the day, I just had the druid like get crazy and like come running up to the upper level. Like there was no way I would have the patience for them to like go all the way down, and I was just like, I can't. But this druid idea is so cool, so I'll just put the tree right up here.
There's something to be said for just like taking all the cool ideas and cramming them into a smaller space. Right, especially if you're not going to have like, you know, a several month-long mega dungeon crawl. It's just like you want all the cool stuff right there.
Yeah, when I did the Silent Citadel for my club, so I ran it 3 times with different groups depending on how much time that they had, and that was an example of cutting things out. Like when I did the whole thing over the span of 3 or 4 sessions with the first group, and then the next group we've only got a couple of days. Well, how do we hack around this? And then, you know, but you still have those same beats all the way through. Like there's those moments in that adventure where it's like, oh, this is the exciting next thing, and you can always hit those, but it's what happens in between I think you can hack up.
Well, hell,
I love the idea of the druid.
You know that dungeon well, sir.
Well, yeah. Sort of. It was the first one that I did, so I was like, that was my experience playing D&D. Oh, actually no, that's a lie. The first one I did, the first session I ran was actually your getting everyone into D&D. You know, we've got like the cages and stuff, and you have the timer and the dragon. Yeah, that was the first introduction to role play.
That's how I introduced them to their fundamental human needs.
D&D. Yeah, that's so great. Yeah, and that was the first role playing session that we did. And everyone loved it. So, you know,
that's crazy. Yeah. That's awesome. And then you jump from that to Sunless Citadel.
Yeah.
No biggie. No biggie.
Oh,
guys,
no, we did
this.
Yeah, no. Yeah.
All right. Final question. Final question. It's all down to Trent.
Okay. Let's make sure I get a good one.
Something where we can reach zero sum with our answers.
Okay. Well, I think this is something that I've encountered recently, which is how do you pitch OSR to your friends? Because I think with, like, I don't know about you guys, but I have always just referred to role playing as D&D. So like whenever we get someone else involved, it's like, oh, do you want to play D&D with us, regardless of the system? But getting people into alternate rule sets and stuff can be pretty intimidating, especially when they're used to one.
Yeah. I mean, getting new players into OSR is really easy because they don't know anything else. You can just be like, here's what we're playing. And then they jump right into it. It's harder to, if someone's really into 5th edition, sometimes I just start with adventures. So they get a sense of adventures that are just structured very differently than 5th edition adventures, where there's given a lot more player choice. But if I want to get them into the rules, I usually pitch it as more like hardcore mode, where it's like you want to play D&D, but you have much less hit points. You're going to die in a few hits. Think of it more like Indiana Jones meets survival horror. Like that's what we're going for here. Is you're not heroes, you're survivalists trying to steal stuff. And if they buy into that concept, then it's a pretty easy sell. Because you have to want that like additional layer of difficulty and relying more on their wits than on abilities on their character sheets.
Yeah, the first 2 sessions, a lot of characters do have like 2 or 3 hit points.
Yeah,
and that is a reality that, put that way, is a cool sell.
Yeah,
like, have to can you handle the pain? You know.
It's not even like, can you handle the pain? It's like, can you play a dungeon crawl where you never get hit one time?
Yeah.
right? It's like, that's a totally different way of playing the game.
That's actually pretty potent right there. That's a damn good answer.
Yeah.
Like, can you hang?
Yeah.
That's kind of dope. I think for me, mostly it's new players. So, it's not like I had to make a sell or something, but if I were to take like 5e players that I was screwing around with and try to do it, I think I would use this kind of language I was talking about the other night, which is like, I've kind of been calling it like a ritual. And so like, or tradition is another powerful word. And so if people ask like, man, so wait a minute, these are my fundamental stats and I get one chance to like roll these. What if I get a really bad roll? And then this is a moment where you have to sell it to them, right? And so to me, I said, well, this isn't really the state of the art nowadays, but it's sort of a tradition. It's kind of a ritual that goes back to the beginning. So that way I don't have to say, oh yeah, this is the old way, because I've been doing it that way throughout. So it's not just living in the old school, but it is a ritual. It is a thing that has been done a long time. And now you get to feel the pain and the excitement of doing this and feeling that kind of connection to the beginning. It's like, let's go back to skateboarding again. It's kind of like, actually, you put it perfectly, Ben. Like, can you get on the half pipe with like an old rickety ass skateboard? Like, do you have the skills to kind of improvise rather than this arguably really good equipment? Like, this stuff is straight up made better. It's good. But for the sake of tradition, it's like, those extreme like hunters who use muskets.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not my jam, but I could understand how they want to like form this connection. Not to say I want to go back in the past, because I don't want to have like dysentery and shit, but I want to know that like I'm made of moral fabric that can survive a long lasting tradition. And I think that's something that I can see that twinkle in the eyes of the players. They want to know the pleasure and the pain that D&D players have known a long time, more than they want to, gadget some kind of multi-class, tabaxi dragonborn or something. Like, I think they actually sort of, this group, especially these, like everyone in this group is in a band of some sort. And I think they actually kind of frown on that version of D&D. So I can play that. I've got some goods in my box they'll want to buy. It's like rolling 3d6 for your stats. I can sell this to you. But as far as these sort of hardcore 5e kind of person, I'm not sure I would be able to make the sale. That's tough. That's a tough one. It's definitely a mindset that is very gripping.
Well, like, people have talked about those 3 pillars of D&D, right? Like the exploration, combat, and socialization. But what someone figured out is they did this big poll and they discovered there's actually a 4th pillar, which is character creation. And that there's a significant number of people, like at least 20 or 30% of D&D players, who say that their favorite pillar is character creation. And by that, I would include things like creating long-term builds over time. So that's like a whole thing within the hobby of people who that is their fun. And old school is probably not a good sell for them. It's probably just not the right kind of game.
No, yeah, you're really just going on loot, and every couple sessions you look at a different line in the one chart.
Yeah.
And that's about it. And then all the relationship stuff. But yeah, you don't get all those cool economy tricks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would actually say Pathfinder is the best at that. I think especially 2nd edition is just stinking brilliant at gadgeting.
That's what it's for, right? 2nd edition is like, do you want to have infinite possibilities with how you make your character?
Yeah, they really cleaned it up.
Yeah.
That really is the 4th pillar? Come on.
That's like it's one of the 4 most popular things. Nope. It's creating that dragonborn, half-classed, whatever.
It's not Escape from Children.
And like, it's not totally foreign to me. Like, there was a part of me when I very first started playing role-playing games, which was Pathfinder, where I'm just like, I would look at the hobby online and it was mostly people talking about builds. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I would spend a while just like making builds, and it was kind of fun. It's kind of fun to see how like the different mechanics would work together and stuff like that. But it's fun you're having by yourself. It's not something that you're not having fun at the table.
That was before you knew about COVID. So you're like, all this solo fun is for the birds.
All right. That is it for today, I think. Thank you, Hankerin and Trent, for joining me. It's been great.
Thank you.
Absolutely. What a pleasure.
And
anytime.
Anybody watching this, go down there to the description where I will have links to their channels. Go and subscribe, click the red button. You know what to do. It's down there probably. Who knows? YouTube could move it. Yeah, get ready for an onslaught of awesome D&D content for both of these guys because it's really, really fun.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Badass word.
Onslaught just in your face, just a fire hose of D&D just like hitting you all day long.
Hell yeah.
Thanks a lot, everybody. See you next time. Thanks for joining us.